Hi, my name is Reed Silverne, and the name of this show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker, and I'm proud of it. Uh, my agency or any other agency hasn't reviewed what I'm about to say. It hasn't been approved by any public affairs officer of my agency or any other agency. In fact, even I don't know what I'm going to say, and I have a lot to say today, even so. Basically, we're entered into a whole new situation coming on. I'm going to talk about something that I haven't talked about in the past, although I've alluded to it, and that is the election situation and the primary situation that's occurred. We're in Arizona right now, and tomorrow is going to be the Arizona Republican primary. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how are these candidates going to affect federal workers. And it's kind of a grim picture because the fact of the matter is none of them are really too friendly to federal workers or too friendly to the federal workforce. Lamar Alexander has been very, very clear that he wants to cut and smash that Washington bureaucracy and take even more programs away from the federal government and block grant them to the states than even the present budget bills that have been wrestled through Congress and the budget process. Then we have Senator Dole, and Senator Dole, of course, is the person who's negotiating the budget process. So I do happen to know a little bit about where he's at and what he's for right now. And basically, they want to shut down the Department of Commerce, Education, and Energy, take some of these other agencies and reduce them and basically get rid of those particular cabinet departments and take some of those tasks and give them to other departments. And of course, the Department of Commerce, which is the one that they've been most fiercely attacking, is the one that comes up with all the figures that Wall Street uses and seems to be Wall Street's best friend in the federal government as well as exporters' best friend. So why a pro-business group or why a pro-business Congress really wants to do that is another story, but it sure looks good. And of course, they want to reduce the number of federal workers. And then, of course, we have Pat Buchanan. And Pat Buchanan, while he hasn't been on the bureaucracy quite as much as some other issues, a lot of what he stands for and a lot of the things that he's supporting are pretty disturbing and should be disturbing to federal workers. Among other things, they found a number of aides and sub-aides and very, very important advisors, the main one of which was Pratt, who's head of Gun Owners of America. Gun Owners of America is not the National Rifle Association. It's not by any means a mainstream outfit. They've basically been trashing the ATF and federal workers, and they don't believe that the federal government has any control over any level of government, and that government law enforcement are a bunch of jackbooted thugs and should be booted out and don't have authority over them or their followers. And they've been pretty overt about it. And he's been at a number of meetings and groups and so on and so forth. And basically, the New York Times has accused him, we'll see how that plays out, of attending a meeting which basically reorganized the militias back in 1992, a meeting attended by the head of Christian Identity, which is a white supremacist religious group, the head of the Aryan Nations, and the leaders of the militias, the right-wing militias, including Louis Beam, who was a former chieftain and Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. So he denies the whole thing. He just accidentally just showed up at a meeting that these people just happened to be at, and said that he doesn't have a racist bone in his body. However, he took a suspension from his activities. And of course, there's another lady who is a chief aide in Florida. She proved to be a member of the National Association for the Advancement of White People. And that group was a group that was started by David Duke as a successor to the Ku Klux Klan, trying to clean up the Klan's image and make them look like people who are for civil rights for the white people and Aryan people. And since then, just in the last couple days, and I haven't really found an article that has all the details of it, another aide has been dismissed who also was a member of the NAAWP. And I believe that was in Georgia. I'm not sure exactly where. So Pat basically says my organizations are just getting started and they're just growing and they're being infiltrated by these groups and these people. And that may or may not be true. Nobody has any proof that he feels that way, but his public pronouncements and positions, which is basically to put a fence along the border and, for all intents and purposes, militarize the border, even though he doesn't start a separate branch of the military the way Lamar Alexander would, which is literally militarizing the border, and may be against certain agreements that we have with Mexico. So it sounds like another harebrained idea that Lamar Alexander has. But he wants to shut off all illegal immigration. He calls this an invasion of the United States, and really puts it in World War II Churchillian terms. And he also has advocated, and he's been very, very serious about it, a 5-year moratorium on all legal immigration, and how these legal immigrants who fill out their paperwork and wait their turn and do their job and basically get into the country legally, why they should be punished because there are illegal aliens out there, is something that I don't understand. But the bottom line is that he's against all immigrants, legal or illegal, and that's where he's at. He's for English first. He's for passing English first laws. I know that there have been English first movements here in Arizona and in California. And I'll tell you where my position is on English first. English first basically says that the governments at every level, including local government, including election forms, should only be carried on in English. If somebody doesn't know English, then they can't deal with government, of course. Why should somebody who doesn't know English not be able to call into a 911 call? Why? There's 1,000 situations where somebody who doesn't know English really needs to interact with government at the local level or at some other level, and it forbids people who even know these languages from communicating with these people, and basically locks them completely out, especially as far as elections are concerned, because it doesn't allow for any election or registration forms and so on and so forth to be written in any language but English. And I think that the purpose of that clearly is to, they see the people who don't speak English as something of a threat. And why should they vote? They don't even like our country enough to learn the language of our country. Now, what we found out, and there's been study after study, that their children are the first to speak English and go out of their way to speak English, despite bilingual classes and so on and so forth. I'm not sure I really a big supporter of bilingual education. And they go out of their way to assimilate into American society. And that's been true with all the immigrant groups that come from foreign countries ever since the 19th century. And as a matter of fact, when the Constitution was put together, the Founding Fathers had a very, very good chance and could have put English only and English as an official language into the Constitution, and they specifically chose not to. And the reason they specifically chose not to is because the white population of America in the 1780s and 90s were not predominantly non-English speaking, but at least had very, very large minorities of non-English speakers. And there was nothing in the Constitution or in the thinking of the Founding Fathers that said that the Germans that settled in Pennsylvania and the French that settled in various colonies and the people from all over Europe that even then were settling through shouldn't be able to set up their own schools and shouldn't be able to set up their own local governments and speak whatever language they want. There was no demand that America be a nationalistic, English-only speaking country. And I don't see where it is in the Constitution. Somebody else can open up the Constitution and say, hey, there's Article 3. It says everybody has to speak English. But in fact, there's nothing in the Constitution that says anybody has to speak English. And if you want to do that, and they've done that at the state level in some cases, you have to pass a constitutional amendment that excludes government from conducting business in any other language. And there is nothing in the Constitution at this point right now. So he supports the English-only movement, and that's another movement that really excludes people that, as he calls it, are not real Americans or have the philosophy of trying to support what real Americans like. Now, that's only one side, though. There's a lot of good things that Pat Buchanan is trying to put forward. And I'd be the last person in the world, somebody comes to me and said, "Whoa, you're a Pat Buchanan supporter." But in fact, Pat Buchanan's message is a message that people should listen to. And I'll tell you why. And that's basically what this show is going to be about. And I know that is going off of my usual message, which is, well, how do things affect the federal worker? Now, basically, I have a document over here, and I've done a little research, which is, of course, a great new step forward for me. And I've gone to the library, and I got something called the Statistical Abstract from the Census Bureau of the United States. And this has basically statistics and very, very well put together statistics on all different kinds of aspects: population, wealth, distribution, taxes, Social Security, and I'm going to be talking about a lot of information that I got out of these statistical abstracts in the future. But one or two facts, or one table, is really the basis of this argument, and this argument has been going on since 1991, and it has a lot to do with why the people were so angry with Bush. After Bush had won the Gulf War, his expectations were raised, and put in Clinton, and why they were so angry with Clinton in 1994 and elected a Republican Congress, and now why people seem to be turning from the Contract with America message, and at least a certain segment of the Republicans turning toward the message of Pat Buchanan. And this is the overall message, not the individual message of we got to stop Jose from coming across the border and some of these other really bombastic portions of his message. And I have a document here which is the money income of persons, percent distribution by income level in constant dollars. And it's really fascinating. These are 1993 dollars, and they're pretty current. And basically what it says over here is the median income in dollars between 1970, measured in constant dollars, so this is within the inflation taken out, and 1993, which is the most current year that this particular book had in its records, and I doubt if it's gotten much better in the last couple of years, has gone down. And what is a median? Median means that 50% of the people make more, 50% of the people make less. And these are for males. And of course, males have been singled out, especially the quote angry white male, has been singled out as the people that have been moving the situation. That's voted for Perot, that moved the Republicans into the 1994 Congress, and that are supporting Pat Buchanan. And they have good reason. And one of these, the situation was in constant dollars, adjusted for inflation, in 1970, and median male in the United States made $23,337 a year in income. That has gone down to $20,102, a 9.6% drop. And what does this mean? What does this mean for America? And basically what it means is that there is a true and absolute reason for this economic insecurity to be sweeping the United States, a constant irritant to the political body that's been going on and that's been continuing for years and years. And the real drop, it started pretty high in 1970. By 1980, it had already dropped, and there was a lot of consternation when Reagan got in there. And when Reagan got in there, it was still dropping until the period 1987 and 1989. And then from 1989 on, it's just been down. It went up very, very slightly between 1992 and 1993. So what does that mean? That means that people in the middle are getting squeezed economically, especially men, because women have gone up somewhat. And that might be offsetting with families. Now, there's another fact in here. It's kind of hidden in the data, but it's very, very clear. And this is very, very interesting to me, although it might be a little, he's just spouting numbers, and who cares about that. In 1970, in constant dollars from 1993 dollars, the people making $25,000 to $50,000 a year in income, the men, there were 35.6% of American men in that category, that broad middle category. There were only 10.2% of the men making more than $50,000 a year, and all the rest were making less, over half, in 1970. Now, in 1993, that whole broad middle category, people making $25,000 to $50,000 a year, went down to 28.8%. There was a 6.8% drop. But if you take 6.8% of that group, of that 35.6, that's over 20% of those people dropped out of that $25,000 to $50,000 middle income category. Now, 2.8% of that 6.8% got richer. They moved up. And that's a point that the Republican establishment has been making ever since 1994. And that's an important point. But 4% moved down. And they didn't just move down to the next lower category, because that group only moved up 1.3%. But 2.7%, almost 10% of that middle class group, moved down all the way below $15,000 a year. Now, what does that mean? That means that if 12% of the middle class males, their income can move down, where does that leave the other 80%? How secure do they feel? They've seen their relatives, people at their level, lose their high-paying job and actually slip down the ladder. And that's not what the American dream is supposed to provide for people. And that is really disturbing to middle-class people, especially people who felt entitled to a middle-class life, that they've worked for it, they've graduated from high school, they've gone up in the world, they've gotten seniority, and now this whole group, 1/8 of the middle class in 1970, middle-class males, their income has actually gone down and slipped. And that is what's pulling down that median of half of the people below, half of the people above. And this is a devastating situation, and one that's very unusual in American history, where every generation has moved up from the generation before, historically. And it's disturbing, and it's creating a basic insecurity. Now, what is causing this movement down? What's causing these people from moving out of the middle class and into the lower income classes? And I'll tell you, and Pat Buchanan has an answer. And Pat Buchanan's answer, it's those darn foreigners. They're stealing our jobs. They're throwing people out of work. But in fact, that really isn't true. As a matter of fact, American manufacturing is at a higher level than it's ever been in history. And that's constant dollars or any other dollars. We're making more things. We're exporting. We're making it for our own markets. But there is something that's causing these high-paying jobs to disappear. And they are right in front of us, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. And I can tell you that the American people have been looking for an answer and looking for a politician to come along and say, stop this, because they're worried about it. And the main reason, and it's something that was predicted since the 1950s and is finally beginning to come true. It was actually in the manufacturing industries come true in the 1980s and 70s, and now is hitting the white-collar world, is efficiency. Basically, it takes fewer and fewer man-hours. The economists call it labor input per unit to make an item than it took before, and it's going to take fewer and fewer hours to make it in the future. Well, what does that mean? Let's say that 20, 25, or 50 years ago it took 300 man-hours to make a car. Now it takes less than 100 man-hours. Now either there has to be a market for 3 times as many cars within the United States or export, or 2/3 of those auto workers are going to lose their jobs. Now 2/3 haven't, but 1/3 have, because we are making more cars and we are selling more cars, but we're not selling 3 times as many cars. Maybe we're only selling 2 times. And of course, this is just an example. I don't have the statistics in front of me. And that's true with almost every manufactured item. Now, Pat Buchanan says they stole this industry from us, they stole that industry from us. But in fact, we've stolen some of these industries right back, and especially from the Japanese. The Japanese took a run at the film market, and they pretty much have a closed film market in their own country. We've been innovating, coming up with new films and new kinds of technologies. And in fact, throughout the world, outside of Japan itself, Kodak has been crushing Fuji, and definitely in the internal market here in the United States. That's true with the chip market. Intel there was a run on the semiconductor market by the Japanese, and now we're making DRAMs again, which are memory chips, and Intel is completely dominating the CPU, which is the main chip, the 46 and the Pentiums that you hear about all the time, and basically push the Japanese chip makers almost out of most of the markets in the world. So we are taking industry after industry back. We're foremost in financial services and insurance services, and we've been trying to open up their market. We've been exporting these services, and they don't show up in a lot of these trade deficit calculations that you see on television. It says, America's trade deficit of such and such. That's in goods, and they don't count services for the most part, and transfers back and forth. So actually, we're doing a lot better in the world than Pat Buchanan will have us believe. But what is the problem? The problem is for not highly educated people, people with high school degrees and people with community college degrees, there are fewer and fewer and fewer high-paying jobs. And where are those jobs going? They're going straight to efficiency. Now, the white-collar worker doesn't have much of a better chance, because we're coming into a situation where I won't say what it is or what they made, but at one point in my lifetime I worked in a plant, and if you went inside the actual manufacturing plant, you saw all these magnificent machines that were worked with computers and had robotic arms and so on and so forth, and you saw almost no people in there. But then when you went into the offices, you found hundreds and hundreds of cubicles and people running around and scurrying and collecting data. That has been the magnificent attractor of high-paying jobs. And I'm telling you that that is going to go downhill. That's what the AT&T 40,000 person layoff is happening, is going down, is that little computer that you see in front of us. Basically, what most of those white-collar workers do is they're doing just what I'm doing over here. They're collecting a piece of data over here, they're collecting a piece of data over here, and they're typing it into the computer into another format with a different narrative, and a different spin. They're collecting the sales data and they're giving it to their boss, and that guy is putting it together over here. And the computer is going to take all the data and put it all together and not require as many people to collect and manipulate data. Now, I'm running out of time. This is Fed Pride. I'm going to talk about this more in a few weeks, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much. This is Fed Pride, and bye.